She walked into the most prestigious cooking competition in the country, wearing a homemade apron and carrying a tattered recipe notebook. They laughed, whispered. One celebrity chef even bet another that she wouldn't make it past the first round. But when Maria Alvarez placed her dish in front of the Michelin-starred judges, what followed silenced an entire studio and revealed a culinary talent the food world had never even heard of. Before we reveal what left even the most critical judges speechless, hit that subscribe button and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's get into it. The Grand Masters. Culinary Invitational didn't just look expensive, it smelled expensive. The air itself was perfumed with imported saffron and truffle oil that cost more than most people's monthly grocery bills. Gleaming chrome countertops stretched across a studio floor big enough to park a bus. Cameras swooped overhead like predatory birds, hunting for drama between the stations. The walls were lined with sub-zero refrigerators, stocked with ingredients flown in from 6 continents that morning. Even the water came from some artesian spring in the French Alps, because apparently Los Angeles tap wasn't pure enough for culinary greatness. This wasn't just cooking. This was theatre, with sponsors who thought flavor mattered less than flair, and critics who judged plating before they ever took a bite. Maria Alvarez didn't look like she belonged there. Hell, she didn't even try to. There she stood at the entrance in a cream-colored apron with faded blue embroidery that read, "Con cariño, abuela," in looping thread. Her sleeves were rolled past the elbow, revealing flour-dusted arms and sun-weathered skin, the kind of hands that had shaped 10,000 tortillas without needing to measure a single ingredient. That apron wasn't purchased from Williams-Sonoma's artisanal collection. It was a birthday gift from her daughter Anna, who'd learned to sew just to make it. Her recipe notebook, bent-cornered and grease-stained, was tucked under her arm like an old friend. Not a single page was typed or printed, just handwritten recipes in 2 different languages, some dating back 3 generations, held together by a spine that had been taped and retaped. The notebook didn't have a designer label. It had history. Meanwhile, the competition world floated around her like it was made of different air. Chefs with sleeve tattoos and PR teams who'd arrived with their own knife cases, matte black, combination locked, custom made by some craftsman in Japan. Contestants who'd staged at El Bulli and trained in Paris, wearing crisp white jackets with their names embroidered in perfect script. The whole place hummed with the particular energy of people who had YouTube channels dedicated to their knife skills and memoirs already in development. Maria just adjusted her apron and walked in. The security guard at the entrance did a double take, checked his list twice. "Contestants only," he said, looking her up and down. "I'm Maria Alvarez," she replied simply. "Station 14. His eyebrows went up, but he stepped aside. The look he gave her, like she'd wandered in from another dimension, was one she'd seen before. The same look she got at the bank when she applied for her first business loan. The same look she got from the health inspector the day her diner opened. The look that said, "You must be lost." She wasn't lost. She just didn't belong to their world. And that was fine by her. The host, a former Food Network darling with gravity-defying hair and teeth so white they looked blue under certain lights, did a double take when she approached. Caleb Richmond had made his name turning cooking into a contact sport. His smile flickered on his face like a faulty light. "Maria Alvarez," he read from his clipboard, lips pursed like he was trying not to laugh. "It says here, no restaurant, affiliation. I run a diner," she said quietly. "A diner!" He repeated it like it was a punchline. She nodded once. "In South Central." The chuckles weren't subtle. A judge leaned toward another and muttered, "Well, at least she'll keep the fryer warm." A contestant 2 stations over, a lanky man with a meticulously groomed beard and tattoos that probably cost more than Maria's car, whispered to another, "Did someone bring their nonna to work day?" The woman beside him snickered. She's got the wrong set. Quaint home cooking is filming in Studio B. They laughed. Maria didn't even blink. She spotted the empty station with her name and walked over, not storming off like someone with something to prove, just moving with the easy rhythm of a woman who'd been on her feet 10 hours a day for 20 years straight. Someone who knew that wounded pride was a luxury you couldn't afford when there were mouths to feed and bills to pay. The producer who'd been assigned to follow her looked disappointed. He'd clearly been hoping for tears, or at least some visible insecurity he could exploit for a dramatic arc. He muttered to a cameraman, "Get some B-roll of her hands. We'll cut her during episode 1, but she'll play well for the humble background angle." Maria unpacked her things, just a knife wrapped in cloth and her recipe notebook. No fancy gadgets, no molecular gastronomy kit, no specialized tools flown in from foreign countries. Just a knife that had been her father's, sharpened so many times the blade had narrowed from years of care. The kind of knife that didn't need to be displayed on a magnetic strip, it just needed to work. From a second-floor control booth, 2 directors watched her with iced coffees in hand. "She's not going to make good TV," one said, pointing at Maria. "Too quiet, no personality." "Look at her station," the other agreed. "No story there, nothing we can build a segment around." "This is gonna be rough," the first one chuckled, pointing at his monitor. "Good thing we've got Max for drama." Max Barnett was the tattooed prodigy from a hip Manhattan restaurant where reservations were booked 6 months out. His Instagram had 2 million followers. His station already looked like a science lab. Sous vide machines bubbling, liquid nitrogen tanked, and ready, tweezers laid out in precise order. He glanced over at Maria and smirked. "Somebody's abuela is lost," he stage-whispered. His friends snickered. Maria didn't seem to hear. She just tested the weight of her knife with practiced fingers and waited. The head judge, a French chef with 3 Michelin stars and an ego twice, "You that size?" stepped forward to explain the first challenge. Philippe Rameau had made his career telling other chefs they were doing it wrong. His hair was silver, his accent thick, his standards impossible. His gaze swept over the contestants, lingering on Maria with a mixture of confusion and dismissal. "Contestants," he announced, "today you show us your foundation, your technique, your understanding of the classics." He paused for dramatic effect. "Your challenge, put your spin on a classic French dish. You have 45 minutes. Your time starts now." The kitchen exploded into motion. Stainless steel clanged against burners. Digital timers beeped to life. Contestants flew between pantry and station like choreographed chaos. The ballet of ambition performed at a sprint. Everyone, it seemed, had a plan, except Maria. She stood motionless for a moment, her fingers resting on the handle of her worn knife. She didn't grab the caviar, didn't run for the duck breast or the truffle oil. Her eyes drifted across the pantry shelves until she spotted a dusty jar of smoked paprika and an unlabeled container of dried ancho chiles. She smiled, small and inward. When she finally moved, it wasn't with the frantic energy of the others. She picked up an onion and began peeling it with the kind of efficiency that comes from decades, not demonstrations. Her movements weren't flashy or performative. They were economical, practiced. The way you move when you've been cooking professionally. Since you were 14 and don't have time for showing off, her knife work was nothing like the others. No flashy cuts, no exhibition slicing, no look-at-me flourishes. Just clean, silent strokes that reduced vegetables to perfect dice without seeming to look down. She held the knife like it was an extension of her hand, not a prop in her culinary theater. One of the judges, Miranda Chen, the only woman on the panel, noticed and stopped. Watched for a moment longer than protocol required. Her lips pursed slightly, head tilted in the way of someone recalibrating. Then moved on, expression unchanged. At the station across from Maria, a young chef with bleached hair and a neck tattoo. Peeking above his collar was preparing scallops for a deconstructed bouillabaisse. Ryan was 26, fresh off a victory at a regional competition, with the cockiness that comes from peaking too early. "You making grandma food over there?" he called to Maria, loud enough for nearby mics to catch. Maria didn't look up, just kept slicing garlic into paper-thin slivers. "I'm serious," he pressed. "What are you making? Something we can get at Denny's?" Few contestants laughed. A camera swung over to catch the interaction. Maria finally glanced up. "I'm cooking," she said simply, then went back to her work. The clock ticked down. 20 minutes, then 10. Most stations looked like controlled disasters. Pots, steaming, machines whirring, chefs shouting for space or ingredients. The drama the cameras craved. Maria's station remained clean, orderly, quiet. She was making coq au vin, technically, but nothing like what the French expected. Her version simmered in a mole-inspired sauce, dark and rich, layered with chocolate, ancho, clove and smoke. She hadn't announced it, hadn't explained her vision to the cameras that circled like hungry dogs. She just cooked, with the quiet focus of someone who'd done it every day of her adult life. At some point, one of the assistant producers approached her station and whispered, "Miss, you know you can talk about what you're making, right? The audience loves hearing the process." Maria nodded politely. "I know." "So, what are you making?" the producer prompted. "Food," Maria replied, then turned back to her pot. The producer walked away, whispering into her headset, "She's impossible, not giving us anything to work with." When the timer buzzed, she stepped back without flair or flourish. Just wiped her hands on her apron and waited. The judges approached Max's station first. He'd created a deconstructed cassoulet with duck confit spheres and garlic air. His plate had edible flowers, arranged with tweezers and foam that dissipated as you watched. The dish was served on black slate with a side of theatre, Max explaining. Each element with rehearsed precision. Revolutionary, the British judge declared, wiping foam from his moustache. "The future of cuisine," agreed Philippe. 2 more stations, 2 more rounds of praise and camera-ready sound bites. Then they reached Maria. Her plate was simple, almost stark in comparison. A braised chicken thigh in dark, glistening sauce. Rice, roasted carrots, no foam, no spheres, no architecture, just food. The kind meant to be eaten, not photographed. The first judge, a British critic named Edward Palmer, known for his brutal honesty and cutting remarks, cut a small piece. He examined it like a gem under a microscope, then took a bite, chewed, and suddenly went very, very still. The second judge followed, then stopped with her fork halfway to her mouth for a second taste. The third judge, Philippe himself, said nothing, just nodded slowly. He didn't look at Maria. He was still inside the flavor. A long silence followed. Then Edward turned to the host. "I've never tasted anything like it," he said, voice quieter now. "It's not fusion. It's not innovation. It's memory." Philippe leaned forward. "It reminds me of something my grandmother used to make, but more honest, deeper." He looked up at Maria, seeing her properly for the first time. "Where did you learn this technique?" Maria's answer was simple. "My grandmother." Miranda Chen, the third judge, finally spoke. "The balance is perfect. The acidity, the heat, the sweetness from the chocolate, it's stunning." She looked at her notes. "And you run a diner?" Maria nodded. "In South Central, 20 years now. You should be running a restaurant." Edward said. Maria's smile was small but genuine. "I already am." On the sidelines, Max and the other flashy chefs exchanged glances. One shook his head. Another quietly scraped his foam into the trash. The room had shifted. Maria wasn't a feel-good story anymore. She wasn't a joke or comic relief or diversity casting. She was competition, real competition. And her dish, it hadn't just silenced the room. It had changed the entire tone of the game. The applause wasn't loud. It wasn't even applause, really. Just a stunned quiet followed by murmured, "Did you try that? And I didn't even know you could do that with chicken thighs." There was no dramatic soundtrack, no slow clap, just the eerie absence of laughter and the quiet realization that the oldest woman in the room had just cooked everyone else into silence. One of the producers leaned toward the director. "You said we'd cut her episode 1. The director shook his head. "We need a new arc." In the contestant lounge, the shift was immediate. Before the first round, no one had bothered to speak. To Maria, they talked around her, through her, past her. Now, 2 competitors subtly scooted over on the couch to make room. A tall chef named Carter, previously too cool to say anything more than "yo," offered her a bottle of water. "That mole cock thing you did," he said, searching for words, "was unreal." Maria nodded and accepted the water. He waited, as if for advice. "You, cook like that every day?" She looked over. "Only when it matters," he chuckled. But there was a flicker of nervous respect in his eyes now. What no one knew, not the judges, not the host, not the smirking contestants, was why Maria was really there. She hadn't come to be famous, or to launch a cookbook, or to get a TV deal. She'd come because she had one shot left to save everything she'd built. Her diner, the one they'd all snickered about, was 20 days away from being demolished. The city had slapped a redevelopment notice on her front window just 2 months after. Her husband Elias passed away. The lot had been sold behind her back, slated to become a chain cafe with chrome chairs and smoothies that cost more than her entire lunch special. The eviction gave her 60 days. She had 20 left. It had started with the heart attack. Elias had been working the grill, same as he'd done for 19 years, when he clutched his chest and collapsed by the fryer. The regulars had helped lift him. The paramedics had worked for 20 minutes. The hospital staff had been kind, but final. Maria had barely had time to bury him when the notice appeared. "Revitalization project," it said in clean, friendly font, like destruction could be made palatable with the right typeface. Her daughter, Inna, had found the flyer for the competition while scrolling through social media. "First prize is 50 grand, Anna had said, placing the printout gently on the counter like it was a lifeline. "You could buy the building back, at least fight for it," Maria had shrugged. "That's for real chefs, Miha." Inna had given her that look, the one she'd inherited from her father, stubborn, determined. "Mama, I've eaten at those fancy places. Trust me, you're better." But Maria had hesitated. The competition world was nothing like the one she knew. It wasn't about feeding people. It was about impressing them. "Please," Anna had whispered, "for Papi." 2 weeks later, Maria received an acceptance email. Her daughter had submitted her application, typed up Maria's story, scanned pages of her old recipe notebook, even attached customer testimonials. Somehow it had worked. Maria almost didn't go. The night before her flight, she stood in the kitchen and stared at her grandmother's old komel, blackened from decades of use. She ran her fingers over its edge, remembering the last time Alma had whispered to her, "The secret is in what you remember, not what you measure." She packed her apron, her notebook, her knife, and boarded a plane. Now, standing under lights too bright and cameras too close, she didn't care about the judges, or the whispers, or the eye rolls. She cared about the diner, about Alma, about the girl in South Central who once learned to knead dough because her family couldn't afford store-bought bread. This wasn't her world, but the fire inside her. That had been lit long before any of them picked up a whisk. In the team challenge that followed, Maria was paired with Olivia, a Korean-American pastry chef known for her strict technique, and Vijay, a molecular gastronomy expert with more gadgets than words. We could use your intuition, Olivia said, not joking. Maria nodded. Only if we use real food. No gels. Vijay laughed. Deal. Their challenge: reinvent a childhood comfort dish for fine dining, while other teams immediately reach for tweezers and foam dispensers. Maria drew a rectangle on a napkin. My mother used to make sopa seca, she said quietly. Dry noodle soup, burned at the bottom of the pot on purpose, with avocado and queso fresco on top. Olivia raised an eyebrow. You want to buy burned noodles? Maria nodded. Trust me. They did. When the judges tasted it, presented as a layered terrine with crisped pasta, spiced tomato reduction, lime creme, and hand-crumbled cheese, they were silent for longer than usual. Then the Michelin inspector wrote something quickly on his notepad. That's a good thing, Vijay whispered. He only does that when he finds a standout. Maria said nothing. She didn't need validation. She'd cooked through years where no one said thank you, no one tipped well, and the city inspectors shut her down twice for pipe leaks she couldn't afford to fix. She'd lived through nights when the register came up short, and days when supplies cost more than sales. She'd cooked through her children's first fevers, through eviction warnings, through nights when her feet hurt so bad she'd soak them in ice water just to stand the next day. Cooking for judges was easy. It was cooking for people who had nothing that had taught her what flavor was for. The next morning, everything changed. Maria arrived at the studio to find the crew treating her differently, not with fake reverence or performative respect, but with genuine curiosity. Camera operators who had previously ignored her now angled for her shots. Sound technicians who had dismissed her as not good TV now made sure her mic was perfectly placed. Social media had exploded overnight with a single clip, a 5-second close-up of Maria placing her mole-braised chicken on the judge's table. The caption read, "This woman walked in with a recipe book, not a resume, and destroyed everyone." Overnight, she went from background to headline. Food critics tweeted freeze frames. Culinary schools asked for her recipe. A blogger labeled her the Quiet Tornado. Comment sections filled with variations of "I would die for Maria" and "protect her at all costs." When the host tried to poke fun again during a coffee break, making some quip about diner desserts, Maria simply raised an eyebrow and said, "You want a plate or just a punchline?" He laughed, but he backed off. Later that day, one of the judges approached her in private. "You've never competed before?" he asked. Maria shook her head. He looked baffled. "Then where did you learn to cook? Like that?" She thought about it, about the decades of food stamps and grease burns and prayers said over Sunday pots, about her grandmother Alma's calloused hands stirring broth while humming the same lullaby, about cooking through grief, through joy, through exhaustion. "Nowhere special," she said, "just home." The judge paused. "Well, it shows." The final challenge wasn't announced until the morning of. Maria stood among the 4 remaining contestants as the host revealed it. Cook the dish that made you fall in love with food. No limits, no theme, just soul. The room tensed. Max pulled out his culinary journal. Olivia started listing plating ideas out loud. Vijay paced in tight circles, reciting ingredients under his breath. Maria? She closed her eyes for a moment. The dish that made her fall in love with food. That was easy. She could still feel the heat of her grandmother's kitchen, the steam on her cheeks, the hiss of chilies hitting hot oil, the rustle of dried corn husks. But above all, she remembered the sound Alma would make when she took her first bite. A quiet hum, like she'd just remembered. Something beautiful, the way she'd tap her spoon against the edge of the plate, once, twice, 3 times. A tiny ritual of appreciation, the way her eyes would close for just a second, not dramatically, just long enough to be fully present with the flavor. Maria opened her eyes and began. She didn't go near the liquid nitrogen station, didn't ask for Foie gras or black truffles or any of the luxury ingredients the others were grabbing. Her hands moved straight for fresh corn, dried guajillos, garlic, and masa harina. Humble ingredients for most, sacred ones for her. From the protein fridge, she pulled out pork shoulder, not belly, not tenderloin. Shoulder, because it needed time and love and patience, because it tasted better when cooked slowly, like stories told by someone who isn't trying to impress you. Max, from 3 stations over, raised an eyebrow. "You making tacos?" Maria smiled without looking up. Something like that. She made tamales, but not the kind that show up on fine dining menus wrapped in microgreens and irony. Not the kind that get deconstructed into foams and essences. She made real tamales, slow-cooked pork braised in red mole with toasted cumin, smoked ancho, and crushed pumpkin seeds. The mesa was hand-kneaded, whipped with just enough lard to fluff, then spread onto soaked husks with the evenness of experience, not measurement. She worked with the steady rhythm of someone who had made this dish 1,000 times before, not for cameras or competitions, but for Sunday gatherings, for birthdays, for wakes, for ordinary Tuesdays when the diner was closed and her children were hungry. By the halfway point, her station smelled like a memory. The fragrance of toasted corn husks and ancho chiles reached all the way to the production booth, where even the jaded camera directors paused to inhale. Even the camera crew got distracted. A boom operator whispered, "I'd trade a week's pay to taste that." One by one, the other contestants finished their showpieces. Olivia's dish looked like art, 3 geometric bites on black slate, inspired by her mother's pickled vegetables. Max's was sculptural, a vertical construction of lamb, and lavender foam, with elements suspended in space with culinary magic. Vijay's plate glowed under the lights, colors chosen for maximum visual impact, plated to create depth and drama. Maria stepped forward last. She didn't say much, just placed one tamal, still warm, husk peeled back gently, onto a plain white plate. The only garnish was a small spoonful of smoky salsa and a few leaves of freshly chopped cilantro. The host looked unsure. "Just one?" Maria nodded. "That's all it takes." The judges leaned in. The first bite was met with silence. Then a second. The Michelin inspector closed his eyes. Philippe's eyebrows shot up, then settled into an expression of profound surprise. Miranda dabbed her eyes with a napkin. Edward put down his fork, stared at the plate, and said nothing for a long time. Finally he murmured, "It tastes like someone loves you." Maria said nothing, but inside something settled. The dish wasn't just food, it was her grandmother's hands, her mother's kitchen, her husband's smile at their first dinner together, her children's laughter around their small table. It was 20 years of feeding strangers who became family. It was everything she'd ever known about love and nourishment, wrapped in a corn husk. The judges conferred in whispers, no suspense music, no dramatic countdown. When the host returned with the envelope, no one fidgeted. They knew. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "the winner of the Grand Master's Culinary Invitational is Maria Alvarez." The room erupted, not in cheers, not at first, but in relief, in admiration, in awe. The contestants applauded, genuinely, even. Max nodded and said, "Yeah, that's fair." The French judge approached her afterward. "You didn't just cook food," he said. "You gave us a memory we didn't know we'd lost." Maria smiled. "That's what it's for." They handed her the prize envelope, $50,000. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "Gracias, Alma," and looked up like someone was watching. Backstage, the producers circled her. "What are you going to do next?" one asked. "Book deal? Restaurant concept? TV show?" Maria thought for a moment, then replied, "I'm going home. There's a building I need to buy back." 2 months later, Maria's diner reopened, not with fancy new fixtures or rebranded concept, Just the same worn booths, the same chalkboard menu, the same 5 dishes served with unapologetic heart. But there were a few changes. A framed photo of Elias hung near the entrance. A small plaque that read, "For Alma," sat on the counter. And a waiting list by the door, because now people drove from across the city to taste what the judges had discovered. Maria didn't change her prices, didn't change her hours, just kept cooking the food that had saved her life and now had saved her home. Because in the end, that was the secret ingredient, the one no competition could judge, no camera could capture, and no trendy restaurant could replicate. The simple truth that the best flavors aren't created to impress strangers. They're created to nourish the people you love. Have you ever seen someone get laughed out of a room, only to watch them silence everyone with their talent? Or maybe you've been in Maria's shoes, underestimated because of your age, your background, your silence, until you showed what you could really do. Tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and I'd love to hear your story. If this tale of quiet strength and undeniable skill inspired you, hit that like button. It helps more than you think. And if you want more stories about simple women who don't need permission to be great, make sure you're subscribed with the bell icon turned on. Share this with someone who's ever been mocked for being too plain or too old-fashioned. They might need it more than you know. Our other stories should be popping up on your screen right about now. Pick your next one, and I'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another unforgettable story.